Hello, everybody. This is the kubeadm office hours. Today is the 8th of April, 2020. Please add your topics to the agenda document and your names to the list of participants. I'm going to share the agenda document link in chat. Fabrizio, by the way, I made you a co-host. All right, so let me share my screen as well. All right. Okay. Can you see this window, by the way? So it's telling me that I can only share one window now. Interesting. Anyway, we have to see the browser anyhow. So, do we have new participants to the call? I don't see anybody new. So yesterday, PSA, yesterday in the sequence lifecycle session, we decided on some new rules for the Zoom meetings. So basically, when you host a meeting, what you should do is always add a co-host. And this is possible when you claim the host. You can go to the list of participants, select someone, click on more, and there's an option, make co-host. So the idea is that, so while I'm talking to you, the co-host can potentially go into the list and mute somebody if needed, to help the host. Sharing screen now requires permission. So this is like a precaution. And this is a reminder, it's a previous rule that we have. Never share the Zoom links for the meeting in public channels, emails, and forums. So whoever has access to this document should be able to click on the Zoom link. And we have to modify this, by the way, because it's a hard-coded ID. So I can do that now, I guess. So this is the link, this is the text. Something like that. All right. Does anybody have any PSAs? All right, let's proceed to the agenda. Martin, you have a PR.
Yes, that's what we decided to do a couple of weeks ago concerning the open question of how to set up load balancing and virtual IP for HA clusters. And as we discussed, I've just written a simple how-to guide as a markdown document in which is supposed to be just used from the GitHub site. Well, yes, giving two examples, one of them being the well-known combination of kubeadm and HA proxy, the other one kubeVIP. Yeah, I think, well, you just take a look at it. There's not really much more to say. Looking forward to feedback.
So try to understand here, you gave two options. One of them is kubeadm with HA proxy, and the other one is kubeVIP. Why is this considered the third option?
Well, it's could probably be moved up one level, made a subsection. It was just, I mean, it's just sequential. First of all, you decide what to use, either the kubeadm HA proxy version or the kubeVIP one, and after that you do the bootstrap. It's just a little last section saying something like, now you have to run kubeadm init according to the docs and make sure to pass the control plane host name and port to the kubeadm command line.
Okay, I see. as immediate feedback, what you can do, so if given this is the highest level,
Yep.
you can have overview as a two hash tags here.
It is.
And this is the second level, the second item on the second level.
Yes.
And I think these should be level 3 at this point. So with 3 hashtags.
Okay. Right.
I mean, if we are following these 3 here.
Oh yes, yes, yes. Of course, you're right. I think that is simply a mistake. Yes.
So this one has 2, this one has 3. So
yeah. Okay. Right. I have to fix that. Okay. So just first bug found.
yeah.
I tried to finish it before before today's meeting, so I was probably a bit too fast in the end.
Mm-hmm. So I think our idea here is to add this. Let me open the other page.
You can actually view it on my GitHub account. Then you'll have it nicely formatted. That's probably more convenient.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to open the kubeadm JDoc, and I guess now when we have the link for first steps, we say, okay, you can use HA proxy as a load balancer. Now the question for the group right now is, should we link to your guide in the kubeadm repo once we merge the PR?
In my opinion, yes. We have to consider when the page is finished, and we have to be careful in clearly express what are the guarantee or the consideration about the guide which is in the command mean.
Mm-hmm. Do we want to add some sort of a disclaimer here? Like, hey, we have a guide, but what?
Let's consider, in my opinion, we should simply add something like alternative solution, a list of alternative solution is proposed in this link.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then this link should contain the disclaimer, basically.
Yes, I think this is going to be a huge improvement. Thank you, Martin, because people until now are basically Googling for blog posts and tutorials. And if we maintain this guide, it's going to be better, except that me in particular, I'm not really an expert in load balancer by any means. So if somebody finds a bug here, like the question is, should we ping you, Martin, to help to fix this, documentation issue, or like we have to understand the ownership here? I know that Rafael also is pretty much an expert in these parts. Like I'm basically looking for people who can help with the with the ownership of the document.
Well, obviously, since I've written it, I should be owner. That's okay for me. I have been using those tools, at least Keep Alive, the HA proxy, Nginx, etc., for these purposes for quite a while. So I know a little bit about it, but of course I can't give any guarantee. But I shall be happy to try to help if there is anything.
Yeah, it's open source. It's a best effort. If you're not around to help for this, we have to figure it out ourselves. How to amend the doc. But yeah, thank you very much for this. I guess now the question is who we should assign as reviewers. Fabrizio, as you requested this, do you want to have a look? And also Rafa, I guess.
Yeah, I can try to test it because I'm not an expert, but it will be, at least I will learn something.
Yeah, I think we should also have what was his name again? The author of the kubeVIP. He probably has some proposes some idea regarding the configuration, maybe some optimization or whatever. I have already tagged him in the PR, so he should probably look into it anyway.
Are you sure this is him?
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, I've just taken the name from the GitHub page where actually the code is hosted.
Yeah, Dan runs
Dan.
Plug.io.
Yeah.
That's his vanity domain for the project.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to ping Rafa as well. Does anybody else want to ping on the PR?
I may take a look at it as well.
Okay.
I mean, we've already identified that probably the sectioning, subsectioning, etc., is not optimal. But I'll just wait for a couple of comments and then try to put it all together in one go.
Okay.
All right. Let me add documentation. Long-term. Okay, to test is fine, but we don't really have tests for docs. All right. Anything else on this topic? Okay, moving on. Lee, you have items?
Yeah, I just wanted to notify that I followed up on the action item from last week for submitting the conformance results for kubeadm. The Sonobui project added the ability to print out the dependent images, which allows us to bake a pre-baked VM image for the conformance tests. This improves runtime from 3.5 hours to less than 1.5 hours, sometimes just 1 hour. So the swapping of, or the thrashing of I/O for image pulls definitely slows down the conformance run. Just FYI. And I submitted for 117 and 118. And I may do this for kind as well, since it's not that hard to do in the background now that the tests are no longer so flaky. I did have one flake, but just rerunning the suite was fine. And then the following 3 items are about design and feeling out priority and direction from the last meeting.
Thank you for submitting conformance.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to have a question here as well. Like, do you think in the future we should just run this with kind? Because to my understanding, the Sonobui tests are running only the conformance suite, but not the node conformance, where the major argument about kernel overrides and things like that, shared kernels between the nodes. We are not even running the node conformance, to my understanding, with the Sonobui results, right?
Yeah, I'm not educated. I know that the test suite that Sonobui runs is rather truncated. I don't know what the review and requirements process for the conformance test suite really even is. I know that people check the logs in the JUnit, but to make sure that versions match and that there's no failures.
Mm-hmm. Because I'm pretty sure we are not running the node conformance. And we are actually running it. Okay. So if you see this bit here, means that we are also running node conformance. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's something like 300 end-to-end tests that actually get run from the output or something like that out of the 4,000. Mm-hmm. Although the 4,000 might actually be all of the tests from every Kubernetes version, now that I think about it.
Yeah, I think, because I know that kind is also running these, I don't think that we even have tests that are going to catch problems in a cluster that is sharing kernels versus a cluster that is using separate kernels for the nodes. I don't think we have test coverage for that. So I'm trying to invalidate the argument that kind is not sufficient.
For but oh, sorry, kind of. First of all, it's not a secret cycle project, so we can help in submitting the conformance if this is easy. But I don't catch why we should care about the story about shared kernel or how this impact our test grid or the kind test grid. Should not be this a problem of SIG-node?
Well, I mean, SIG-node is not the one submitting conformance tests for kubeadm, but yeah, I mean, I think I'm just a little confused as to why we even need to discuss it, because like this test runner requires very little maintenance and it does the job, and I don't understand why we would need to do a regression. So
Yeah, my point is that if we set the conformance result for kind, we can say that kubeadm is also conformant.
yeah, I mean, we would have to submit results for kind. We haven't done that for the past couple of releases. So.
Yeah, Lubomir, I agree with you. And basically, if you think to Minikube and probably other installer, all of them are validating kubeadmin, but I'm not sure if we can say that kubeadmin is conformant formally. I don't know if it is valid indirect conformance. So saying that kubeadmin is conformant because we submitted kind conformant. I don't know if people understand this.
Yeah. Also, these projects can modify the default kubeadm deployment. So yeah, we cannot say that kubeadm is kubeadm is conformant if Minikube is conformant.
I think that in terms of relation with the community, especially with people which are getting, which are starting with Kubernetes, I think that having kubeadmin list as a conformal tool is something important. So as soon as we can manage design +1 to submit a separate conformance.
I don't understand something from last time. I don't understand if kubeadm is going to be even removed from the list of installers. Leo, do you happen to know where the list of conformant installers for 117 is located? I have no idea.
It's not clear to me that up-to-date conformance is strictly required to be listed on the CNCF landscape. The Kate's conformance repository master branch can be considered authoritative on whether or not the list is up to date for a particular version. So if you go to any of these directories, then you can see who is up to date. Okay. So yeah, like Typhoon and Talos right here are, they've submitted results and are considered good.
Yeah, I question whether this is, this is the right signal for consumers to consider something conformant, like looking at a folder or a GitHub repository. But yeah.
No, it's definitely not. I mean, I don't recall seeing any of that data on the landscape website, but maybe it is there. I just don't know.
I mean, kubeadm hasn't moved from the landscape. It's still there in the list of installers, even if we don't send the results. So that's like...
Yeah, let's see. So it's under certified installer kubeadm, and then the data doesn't appear to show what versions we're conformant for.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, yeah, like from one, it's like if you do a kind installation, it built into kind are a bunch of exceptions for things like swap. And then yeah, it's using a nested Docker, and none of that. We don't have to do any of that in a proper virtual machine environment.
Mm-hmm.
So the it's also just serves to me as like actually taking kubeadm like through the testing process. Like just like when we release, I do the conformance test and I know, oh, okay, 118 works. So this is not a maintenance burden for me. It's something I have to do anyway. But,
yeah. Oh, if you know, I personally would not submit these results, but if people want to help, please go ahead. Because
yeah, I mean the process is completely repeatable. So it's the only dependency is Vagrant and an internet connection. So
yeah.
I actually learned a neat trick. If you look at the Vagrant file, you'll see I'm using a trigger to do something interesting. If you go to the link at the bottom, when I submitted the result in the comment.
The PR.
Yeah, in the PR. I had a link to it from the page you're looking at.
Okay.
Yeah, if you just go there and then go to files changed.
Which of these links?
It's in the changes in the files change list.
Uh-huh.
And then you go down to the Vagrant file section, which is just a little more. Yeah. So basically, if you control F for trigger, it's right here, the define base image, and then it says trigger run, and then basically on up, it packages this VM into an image. And then the following images end up using the base image. So yeah, I've never known how to do this in Vagrant before. It's not something that's documented or supported really. But yeah, you can do this. And I've always wondered, like, how can I prepare a base image that's separate, like, from the actual application? Because normally people will have a provisioning script that does all of their dependencies and then all of their app setup. And then if something fails, then you have to like re-provision the base image, like every time with Vagrant. And this gets rid of that problem completely. So
this is nice. There's also speed up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it makes things way faster. This saves me like hours when running tests. So, you know, just download all of the Docker images beforehand. So.
Okay.
Anyway, neat tricks. Yeah. You guys want to chat about the features?
Yeah. Okay. Moving to the next item.
Yeah, this is just regarding that uninstaller configuration, and I'm fine to call it something else, like add-on apply configuration or whatever. This is just the name right now. So I had a talk with Sadef from the Cluster API group, and we're going to POC the add-on installer API into the post-apply operator. So that'll be something that could be used at the cluster API level. It's also totally sensible to include this API as an override mechanism inside of tools like kubeadm and kops. Kops is going to continue keeping its promise of supporting add-ons, and that list is long because of CNI. So the main problem we're looking to solve there is decoupling the versions and the ownership of the CNI manifests from the version of kops, because it's a large maintenance burden for the kops team. So we've got a smaller subset of that problem inside of kubeadm, which is just that we have the core add-ons for DNS and proxy, the node proxy. So if we just need to decide, like, okay, well, the way that we expose kubeproxy and core DNS to users is potentially inflexible. And Timothy's suggestion of using skip phases to not install these things was actually quite interesting. If we were to document that and just have that be the solution for kubeadm not owning those add-ons, then I would be very pleased with that. The second item is actually just having an off switch for both of these add-ons, something that can be formally described in the API. I think whatever we do, you should be able to, using the kubeadm APIs, like the component config types, you should be able to declaratively instruct kubeadm to not do these things, and then also potentially do something else if you want, right? So the add-on installer configuration is one complete minimal mechanism that is a component config that will allow you to not do kubeadm's default kubeproxy and core DNS behavior. But I'm open to even simpler interfaces if we're just looking to give people the ability to turn it off.
I think that the problem of letting people to disable add-ons is something which is burdening us from some time. So I would like to give a simple solution to the user. I'm from skipping phases now, but we have to address, as soon as we skip phases, there is another problem that we have to make upgrade capable to detect that add-on are missing, and so basically to skip, to avoid to reinstall add-ons.
Yeah, so can skip phases be declared from any kind of component config?
No, now skip phasing is only in Flex.
Only flag, okay.
Okay, and I think, considering the problem of adding flags to the, or a boolean to the config, is that we have to cut another release, and it's something that I would like to avoid, because in order to cut another release, we have to group a lot of significant changes, and cutting a release also is giving burden to the user. So in my opinion, we should go for a simpler release without changes in the API. And
So in that case, add-on installer configuration is a little bit attractive because it's using feature gates, which is an existing API field. And then it adds a completely different API object that will not impact existing users.
Actually, the way I'm imagining this is more like if we enable the add-on installer itself, kubeadm is probably then going to give up all all management on the add-ons on its side. So the moment we actually get an add-on installer enabled, then we would automatically skip all of the core DNS and kubeproxy phases everywhere in each command.
Yes.
The add-on installer should be able to actually handle those phases itself.
Yeah, my thoughts on this are, if the add-on installer is enabled, but the user does not provide a config, then it will use the defaulted config, which will include core DNS and kubeproxy.
Yeah.
And then the kubeadm config print command can print the defaulted add-on config. So if somebody wants to change the add-on installer behavior, then they can for their Kubernetes version using their kubeadm config, they can get a specific version of the default add-on installer config.
Yeah, and like kubeadm is also probably going to give up on the managing the config of the add-ons. So this includes kubeproxy's config right now. So basically all of the add-on stuff in kubeadm is probably going to be shut down and transferred over to the add-on installer.
Yeah, I think like the pattern, this is just a more general comment, but like when kubeadm doesn't receive input from somebody, like on upgrade, and then the pattern of it going to look in the cluster to see, if there's anything that it can do on best effort, by like finding a secondary source of authoritative config, is a good one. Like that is a really good UX choice. But ultimately, I don't think you should ever pull the control away from the user. And so I think it is a misstep if you, on upgrade, are always considering the in-cluster config, which, by the way, the user has complete control over anyway, as the authoritative source. Like, it should always be possible for a user to override the behavior of the tool. And I know that we've, like, that doesn't change the fact that our stance on modifying the cluster is not supported, right? But if you give the config flag on upgrade, you can even put it in all caps in the help text, like not all mutations for config are supported, but definitely there are a large set of things that people would want to change that make total sense. And so, yeah, with regard to managing that config, giving the control to the users through the add-on installer configuration allows them to do whatever they want with their core DNS install, or their kubeproxy configuration, or anything, right? Like if they're using the add-on installer config, then on upgrade, they can pass a new add-on installer configuration, right? And they can get a completely different add-on installed, and the old one removed or whatever they want. And
on upgrades, we are moving away to let the user to make change during the upgrade.
Mm-hmm.
And if kubeadmin is giving away from managing add-on, it should not take care of the of doing the upgrade. So the add-on management should provide its own way to do upgrades.
Yeah,
I don't know if it is operator driven or whatever.
Mm-hmm. It's not, this particular feature is not operator driven in any special way. It's really just a declarative, like slightly higher level API to describe how to apply resources, and group and package those resources, which is the big missing idea that we have.
But for upgrades, for install, it covers not all the case, but it covers some cases. For upgrade, it covers fewer cases. For instance, if you mention the upgrade of core DNS, there is always the problem of converting the core DNS config map. So we don't want to allow the user to do upgrade of a provider when we know that upgrading provider is not only apply a manifest. I stand with Ross' point that if we are going to skip or to delegate upgrade management, we should stay out of the business of upgrading, even deleting when we kubeadmin is just out of the business.
Yeah, I think there's some different ways to think about config upgrades. One of the more interesting points that's often where mistakes are made is reusing the same config map with the same name and changing it during the life cycle of changing a deployment, which produces a new replica set. If you have two replica sets that, say are using two different versions of Core DNS and they need different configs, then the config maps that those replica sets reference should be different. This is a constraint of a rolling upgrade strategy deployment. So there are some very attractive features that are declarative and idempotent that are built into tools like Customize and Helm that will, say, hash your config maps content, the data, right? And then name the config map like based off of the content of that data. So say in the context of a Core DNS upgrade where you're changing the version of the core file, right? And the schema's changed. Then the config and its overrides by the user on the package should be packaged with that version of Core DNS. If you need something that's like truly ornate, right, which is like supporting a live upgrade of a user despite the fact that you've declared it in the previous add-on version to be this content, and the user changed it or whatever, then you can still package those things and put a job or an operator with the config upgrade mechanisms into it and do a config migration or something and put it into a new config map with a new name, right? And then get the second replica set to reference that. And all of that stuff is very possible, by just packaging the add-on properly. But there are more basic needs that are not being followed with regard to upgrading these components that we can focus on with better packaging.
Well,
And
I
like,
don't know. In my opinion, is that if we are going to skip or to delegate the add-on management, then kubeadmin is out of the game. So it's not a kubeadmin responsibility anymore. Yeah,
it would be the add-ons responsibility to do that within the constraints of a declarative package. I'm totally on board with you there. Like if Calico wants to instrument an upgrade from etcd to Kubernetes backend, then they should include the machinery and the RBAC and the code to do that using a package, just like a Debian package or anything else that would need to do a migration. Kubernetes especially when you're with kubeadmin, like you have full admin rights to the Kubernetes cluster. So your add-on package, has the full power of a distributed computer. You should be able to do anything you want without having to modify kubeadm.
So here is my idea. Basically, today it is possible to skip the add-on phases completely during kubeadm init. Then when you do a join, we don't care about core DNS, but we care about kubeproxy because we want to have a kubeproxy instance there on the new node. And we fail, currently we ignore the fact that the kubeproxy config map does not exist. So we say the user did not deploy kubeproxy on this cluster. So we already have logic for that. kubeproxy is not deployed, so we don't care about this add-on. For core DNS, on joining nodes, we don't care, like I said. On upgrade, I've been bragging about adding upgrade apply phases for a very long time. If we can skip upgrading of add-ons, we can potentially delegate add-ons completely to an external stack. Currently, I know Rossi approved my PR. We ignore the fact that the kubeproxy does not exist in the cluster. and we can say, okay, I'm not going to upgrade kubeproxy on this cluster. But for core DNS, we still perform the upgrade because we don't have the logic to skip there. In my view, in the future, what we should do is we should deploy a core DNS operator and a kubeproxy operator as part of kubeadm by default. Make it possible to skip this. And then if the users skip this, they can delegate to an external add-on installer where they can decide to deploy these add-ons in a custom way. It feels very, it's not clear to me something to add here. It's not clear to me how we're going to pipe some control plane configurations to the add-ons. Jason added a very good example. How do you predefine the cluster CIDR for the controller manager when you want to deploy Calico? It has a need for a specific CIDR that you have to deploy in advance on the controller manager, and then you have to deploy the add-on with this specific CIDR defined. This is going to be a very difficult problem for us to solve, and I'm not sure how we're going to do it. But I want to hear more about my operator idea.
I don't think that those operators are in scope of kubeadm.
Yeah, but my point is that somebody else can develop them, and we can then deploy them as part of our default deployment.
To be honest, in the long term, I would like kubeadm to get out of the business of managing the add-ons. So in the future, let me say, my dream is that kubeadm at certain point, just using the add-on configuration or something similar, gives basically contact something else that install the add-ons. And then if the add-ons as an operator is totally transparent from a kubeadm point of view. And so the user can decide to install CNI, CSI, whatever they need, and at the first run, and then they are responsible to manage the life cycle of this object by interacting with the operator, with the API the operator offers. So
yeah, another great example is like a cloud provider, right, and things like that. Yeah, sorry, yeah. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, don't worry. So in the long term, I simply could mean, let me say, but also in the vision that each tool should do one thing, and then we can have a composable piece of solution. kubeadm is as a bootstrapper, so it should only take care of bootstrap the cluster, and then basically for the start, just kick in some add-ons, and then we are out of this business.
Yeah, this is of course what kubeadm should be. Yes, it should be scoped to bootstrapping. Problem is we have a trade-off with UX. You know, do we want to sacrifice the trade-off of the add-on management? Users now have to, like I said earlier, users now, if a kubeadm is not deploying the add-on with, you know, some of these flags specifically configured exactly between the components, now the users have to configure the add-on installer separately. Like how they're going to do this.
This is a good trade-off. So I think that in terms of proposing a solution for the user, so let me say, just to close the point, I think that there is a viable solution to make kubeproxy and core DNS skippable during install, which is skip phases, and during upgrade, we already did this for kubeproxy. we can do something similar for core DNS as well. So if the thing is not there, just ignore the upgrade. Changing the topic, we are telling, okay, but instead of doing this trick or workaround, can we work with the add-on configuration things? And with regard to this topic, I think that the point of Luberman is really valid. And I think that what is missing now, or at least what was missing last time I checked the prototype, or even the cap, was a well-defined way to make the configuration that the user pass to kubeadmin flow down to the add-ons. I think that this is a fair point, and it could be a, let me say, a requirement to get the add-ons things in.
I think so the question is, how can we get the component configuration for kubelet config, or really it's just kubeproxy configuration. How do we get that to be used by a kubeproxy add-on?
I'm not sure that it is the only configuration. I don't remember if there are some other kind of configuration.
And then like another one is the cluster zone and the like service and pod subnets, things like that.
Yeah, we have to check our config, identify what goes to kubeproxy, and if something goes to core DNS as well.
Yeah.
I don't know, for instance, DNS domain probably goes down. And,
so there is an optimization here that can be made for UX that I believe is very solvable. And there are a lot of ways to do it. I think some of the most attractive ways are to actually put those things in well-known places or well-documented places inside the cluster, and then to have add-ons coordinate on those things. Because it's just like dropping a file on a file system, like in a well-known folder like Etsy, right? And then expecting another tool to read it. And that pattern is very common between packages in Debian and etc. Which then express dependencies on each other and that kind of thing. But if you want to solve that stuff in the tool, I've proposed patching mechanisms and templating mechanisms for those patches with supported values that kubeadm could document. So like we could include the cluster CIDR, cluster DNS zone, and values like that we want people to be able to work with because they're hard-coded things that often change. We could include those in a Go template context for inline patches, right? Like that's totally fine with me. You just invoke the add-on library with the Go template context and it works. Those things could be coordinated, using a config map inside of the cluster. The kubeproxy configuration could be, when passed as a component config to kubeadm, it could just be placed into the cluster, but then it skips the actual kubeproxy installation, and then the kubeproxy add-on can then pick it up, right?
I'm for a different solution from something which is more, let me say, isolated. So kubeadmin should not enter in the business of doing patching or whatever. So kubeadmin is calling an API, which is so we'll be calling an API that is the API of the add-on configuration tool or the add-on installer. I don't remember the exact name. And what kubeadmin should do, it should keep his own the user configuration and basically fill the relevant information into the add-on configuration, and then kubeadmin is finished. So kubeadmin is only filling in the add-on configurator API, And
Yeah.
then the add-on configurator API internally knows everything about add-ons, about templates, whatever.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And everything that I've intended to say is supposed to agree with what you're trying to express as well. So I think we're on the same page there. And then also, I'll just point out that I actually don't have a problem with people like specifying a number twice. Like I think it's fine if somebody wants to define the cluster zone in one place and then also in another place. But I am very happy to make accommodations so that people don't have to do that.
Yeah, it seems to be very weird if the add-on installer is going to be aware of the kubeproxy configuration object.
I see it more as just supporting a different UX, which is basically when kubeadm constructs the default add-on config, it can include an inline patch to that config for the kubeproxy add-on that's default. Ultimately, if the user provides their own config, though, right, kubeadm has nothing to do, right? It's really just about like, what does kubeadm do when the user provides no input? And I don't think that is a difficult problem to solve because kubeadm's in control of everything. So I'm happy to add that.
But I will prefer. I don't know exactly what you mean with a patch, but I don't want to kubeadmin to even know what a patch for kubeproxy is. So kubeadmin is simply passing an API type, which is an API type, so it does not relate to customize or to any templating mechanism. With only the information, with the information which are relevant.
Yeah, I'll be clear that like kubeadm will do none of the patching. It's just providing config. One of them happens to be a patch. But we don't have to support that UX at all. We can say if you're using add-on installer configuration, the kubeproxy config object is ignored and then just print a warning.
Okay, how about, like you already proposed something similar. When kubeadm creates the cluster, it doesn't install any add-ons whatsoever, but we have a extra command that you can execute that can generate for you the default configuration for these add-ons that kubeadm requires by default. This requires kubeadm to be familiar with the public types of kubeproxy. And then you pass this to an external tool that is called add-on installer binary.
The add-on installer is a library, so it's just imported directly into kubeadm and just knows how to exec, customize, and kubectl and stuff.
Yeah, but this is further binding to the add-on installer configuration.
Yeah, I mean, the idea was let's provide a library that's very small with an API that's small that will provide general purpose, flexible usage of this API type across installer tools, so that we don't have fragmented people like running bash scripts and stuff. We don't have a core solution for how to describe installing groups of resources.
Yeah, there are multiple proposals for that as well. So how about we just stop caring about kubeproxy completely on the side of kubeadm and document how to install this using external means. But this requires users to know what flags and fields kubeadm needs on the side of the add-on that you have to install manually after kubeadm finishes. This is like complicated in the UX, but this is really the solution to scope basically kubeadm to doing only bootstrapping. But it's it's more difficult. for the users.
Yeah, I mean, I think kubeadm initially took on kubeproxy and core DNS because they are quite general bootstrap needs. It's just a question of whether or not, like, what is an add-on and what isn't, and what is bootstrapping and what isn't. If the goal of kubeadm is to be able to provide people a mechanism to talk about creating working clusters, I think that add-on installer is a small thing that we can add that will provide a lot of return in that area. Because then people can share different kubeadm configurations that add a cloud provider, add a CNI, change core DNS to multi-node DNS, so that you can create a working cluster on AWS, or things like that. Exclude kubeproxy so you can use Cilium or kuberouters implementation, those kinds of things. It is confusing if the default behavior for kubeadm continues to be, run kubeadm init, and then there's kubeproxy and core DNS and no CNI and no cloud provider. We either need to deprecate those things, in my opinion, or we should provide something a little bit more extensible. Because to your point, if you require special config values and you have to change the flags of the actual kubeadm runtime and then you get into the phases abstraction, and none of that is actually controllable via the config file, right? It has to be done in the way you're executing kubeadm in order to have it stop caring about something hard-coded and specific. Then that is a really strange place to be. I think it's a fine interim where we can experiment, and I'm happy to document that. But we should really strive to either be none of that or an extensible layer to give users freedom and a language to talk about clusters. When I think about component config and cluster configuration, join configuration, init configuration, things like that, that is the messaging standard for how people can communicate. This is a multi-node cluster. This is a Raspberry Pi cluster. This is a cluster that works on bare metal. This is a cluster that functions in an AWS networking environment. And if that is the goal, that's certainly been my vision and interpretation. People might disagree. But I think that providing an extensible layer for how to install bundles of things or packages is important. It's 11 o'clock, sorry. So
let's continue next time with this item and also your next item about config maps, I guess. We have to.
Yeah, sure. The multi-node config.
This was a healthy discussion. Thank you, everybody. See